Thanks for joining us for this transformational leadership conversation. We began a class at 4 o'clock this afternoon with Pelles and have had a really significant interchange for the first couple of hours of the class, and we'll get to be together all day tomorrow as we continue to address the really important work that we're about. I'm so glad to welcome you to this public conversation with Rosalind Woodward Pelles, who is a mother, a leader, a wise soul in the struggle that has many names. Roz is a veteran of the civil rights and workers' rights movements. She has a long history of social justice activism that spans 5 decades, beginning with her work as a teenager with the Congress of Racial Equality. She continues to be actively engaged in social justice movements, including as a strategic advisor to the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, an expansion of the work of Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr. Ms. Pelles was, until last month, the visionary and beloved Assistant Director for Student Engagement and lecturer at the Center for Public Policy and Theology at Yale Divinity School. Just a month ago you retired, and you're back with us today, so that's a great blessing. Lest you try to retire, you know that when you're doing good work, they'll continue to call you back. Ms. Pelles previously served as the Vice President of Repairers of the Breach, building a progressive agenda and movement rooted in the moral values of justice, fairness, and the common good. She's the former executive of the North Carolina NAACP, strategist and advisor to North Carolina's Moral Monday movement, as Moral Mondays erupted across that state and then inspired the whole nation. Ms. Pelles was also the Director of Civil, Human, and Women's Rights at the National AFL-CIO. She was the Executive Director of the National Rainbow Coalition and Special Assistant to the Reverend Jesse Jackson, Sr. Ms. Pelles served as the Board Chair of the Highlander Center and on the National Board of Interfaith Worker Justice. Her work has been celebrated with many national awards and honors, and we are deeply honored to welcome Roz Pelles back to Yale this evening.
Thank you.
We're going to talk this evening about the leadership practice of resistance, especially during these uniquely troubling times. But first, maybe we can talk about what centers you in the struggle. What caused you to find your way in this work?
Well, first of all, I'm so glad to be back home. So that's really good.
We're so glad to have you.
This social justice movement came to me rather than me seeking it out and finding it. It came to me in my little Episcopal church in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, that became the headquarters for the Congress of Racial Equality in my city. And so there I grew into movement work and got an understanding of the necessity of it. And it's grounded me totally in what I needed to do. That plus, when I was about 5 years old, I remember my father saying to me when I was complaining about something being wrong, he said, if you see something wrong, correct it. But if you're 5, that's daunting. But as you get older, it was something that I carried with me. So those are things that really helped me get on this path.
Well, maybe you talk about a time when you've seen organized resistance make a real impact, an impact on systems of hurt, oppression, injustice.
So, since my work has spanned many decades, I've seen it a lot.
Yeah.
In various movements, the civil rights movement, the women's rights movement. And so we've seen where people struggle, that we can win. And that happens over and over again when people find an injustice and they struggle, they can win. And we've seen that in those movements. And that's been important, and it's an important lesson for us today as we try to figure out what we need to do now, is to look back at these movements and see what victories we can claim.
You've engaged some pretty significant times, Rainbow Coalition times. Want to tell a story?
Well, you know, I've been in these places like the Rainbow Coalition, repairs of the breach, and I came to them because of the vision of the organization, the vision of the leaders and the leadership of these organizations, a vision that was inclusive and broad. And I often came to these organizations at a time when there was identity politics, but there was an understanding that everybody had to be involved in a movement if you're going to win. That there's a need for inclusion, that while people are engaged in their particular struggles, which is important, that there's a need to bring people together across all lines so that we can have an even greater impact. So in these two places made it possible for me to understand what was happening there.
You were trained as a lawyer at Howard University School of Law.
Yes.
Was your work with the law, was that a driving force earlier on?
That was my intention. And so it was not long-lived. I ended up, after law school, going on to work for trade unions. And I ended up there for many years, and then in civil rights work. So my legal career took a turn, but my full intention was to be a civil rights lawyer and to make a difference in that way. But that was not what I was called to do. I was called to do something very different, and I'm glad I listened to that call.
So we're talking to many people, but students here. What would you say about having one intention and then finding yourself turned in a slightly different way?
I think you have to be open to it. I think I think not being afraid to change course matters.
But we want to know our course. We want it to be straight ahead.
Yeah, we do. We want it to be straight ahead. We want to follow the path we set out. And a real example of that is I retired for the first time from the AFL-CIO, and I retired in February, and I was totally set on taking some time off, spending more time with family, and just trying to gather myself. And I got a call from Reverend Barber, who says to me, "This is a Macedonian call, and you have to listen, and I want you to come to North Carolina for a few months," 13 years later. But I was not afraid. I knew that that was the right thing to do at that time. And so there I was for several years, going down to North Carolina on Monday morning, first flight out, Friday, last flight into the DC area. But that was a life-changing thing. It was a time when I learned a lot, and it was a time to give a lot. And I think for people who come to those crossroads, we just have to be willing to look at what we can bring and what we could learn, and make decisions that don't necessarily coincide with what your plan was. Often a person's plan is only their plan, and there's a bigger plan than how they've thought about things or what they could do.
In our class conversation this afternoon, the conversation turned to the risk and the cost of work that we are called to, the work of justice that matters. Thinking particularly in the present political reality.
Yes.
What are we to do with our fear, with our sense of powerlessness?
I think hope. We have to hope and trust. You know, we have to have enough hope to believe that something different can happen, and we have to trust ourselves, and we have to trust others. We have to trust the people. We, across all lines, are basically wanting the same things. we want a better life. We want a better life for our families. And I think that we have the potential, that creates the potential for us to be together, just to end up on one page. And so I have a lot of faith in the people. And I have a lot of hope that we can somehow get to a real America, the America that was envisioned but has never been, that we've never found. It was clearly an experiment that we're still trying to experiment with. But I hope that we can get to all those principles that were part of that America, where we can all have what we need and what we want, where we can all find a place that is respectful and that has humanity, and that gives us a right to be in that place. And I look for that, and I think most people do. And I have faith that that's true. And people rise to the occasion. And so even now, when it looks like there's so much division,
Right.
and so much hurt and so much pain, I believe that can all be different. But we have to figure out how to talk to each other. We don't talk across the lines of division.
And those lines are getting clearer and harder to cross.
They are, and so we have to get past those. I was talking to a neighbor, and we were talking about this very thing, and then we were realizing we don't have many friends or even acquaintances that are different. And so what does that mean? To me, that means we need to figure out why that is and then go beyond that, to move beyond that in some way. But I believe it's possible. And we've got examples of that in the past where people who start out in different places can be moved. And so I think that that's our job and their job to try to come together. But it's necessary. It's absolutely necessary that we do it.
So you've seen people's minds change.
I have.
What's the road there?
I think we don't know each other. So at one point I worked in a textile mill, and we had very separate lives. It was mostly women, and we were different. We didn't have friends that looked like each other. We didn't have friends that we talked to. But in the course of our work together, we were able to find out what were the similarities and what is it that we could build on and work together. And in the course of that, we found that there are many similarities, and that people could actually take on issues and problems that faced our families together. And I think that still holds. I think people really do have the ability to cross these lines, have the ability to find a common ground, and have the ability to change things. In the absence of that, you can't have hope. Mm-hmm. In the absence of that, you have despair. And this country doesn't have that luxury. We have got to move forward. We have got to figure out how to change minds and hearts.
I have a few more questions, but then I'm going to turn to you all and ask for your questions. So give some thought to what you'd like to ask Roz. Let's talk about finding partners for the work, finding partners for the struggle. The movements that you've been part of have been all about building those kinds of partnerships.
Right.
What's at the core of that?
What's at the core of it? I think that, first of all, there has to be a realization that there has to be this connectedness, that partnerships are critical to changing the country, to changing the systems that we are living in. And I think you have to be able to first recognize that. And then second, I've known and understood the kind of partnerships that were needed, the kind of partners that are, that not only have a vision and that's close to yours, and a partner that's willing to be a partner even when their demands are met. Because in coalitions, what we find are some people are partners until they get what they wanted, and then leave the coalition after their specific issue is dealt with. And in the past, I've been lucky and blessed to have partners who on the front end begin our relationship with, we're in this together. And your fight is my fight, your struggle is my struggle. And it's true because we are all, if we look at things, we're all suffering from the same systems. And so if you have that agreement and that understanding, these partnerships happen and they make a difference and they change. And it brings together movements and then a movement that can be sustained. And that's what we need right now in this country. Yeah.
I'm hearing both strains of the union background that you have and the church background that you have in that talk of finding those partners, that kind of building the coalition. Where are they to be found? Where are those folks to be found if we're feeling alone and like we are the only ones with the voice that we have?
We often find them in their own spheres where they work. We find them in different places. We have to look for them.
Yeah.
We have to have an outlook
They don't just show up.
that looks for inclusivity, that looks for building a movement that's broad. And then you have to be open to building those partnerships once you find them. Mm-hmm. And so it's because of that, the partnerships that I've been involved in have really paid off, and they've been plentiful.
So much of our gathering of information is social media, is electronic, and there are certainly movements in the resistance that's coming up now that are based in social media. What are your thoughts about that?
I think social media is great.
You're not against social media.
I'm
okay.
not against social media. Social media in and of itself is not sufficient. It's not sufficient to build a movement long term. We have to talk to people. We have to build relationships. And often social media doesn't give us the opportunity for that kind of relationship building that's necessary to build something broadly. So I believe that while we need social media gets messages out, it gets information out, it takes us to places that we haven't gone in the history of movements.
Right.
You can get on the internet and do things that my leaflets made on a mimeograph machine would not do. And so I think there's a place for both of them. We just have to know what those places are and then how to integrate those, because I think they have to go hand in hand now.
You know, I think we have a great crowd of folks here tonight, but we have many more who are going to be watching the live stream. But they're going to be watching the live stream alone in their space or with a person or two. To make the connections that we'll be able to make after this conversation together is challenging when we're sitting in our kitchen by ourselves.
Right.
And watching a video or a live stream, to figure out how to make those connections next.
Right. And so for people that are watching this on the live stream by themselves, they ought to talk about whatever it is they hear here. For people in our class, they ought to talk about what they've heard and do it without fear. Sometimes we are worried that people can't absorb or don't want to listen to our message that's different. I think they will, and they do. We just have to take the risk. You know, many people say, I can't talk to my family, but I believe you can. There's a way to reach people. There's a way to talk to people that gets beyond what the disagreements are first and gets to the agreements, and then you move from there.
What's a balanced life look like in times like these? just an easy question, you know. Because the struggle is to feel some hope and then to feel some despair, and then all of the related emotions to those things. How do we keep on, maybe is what I'm asking.
I think we have to really appreciate, one is the history that while we have never been in a spot like this before, there has always been movements in this country that fought against repression and oppression and led to a new day and a better day often. And I think looking at it that way has helped me. I do believe that that there has to be a balance. We cannot just enter into despair. We can't stay there. I mean, we might be feeling bad and like we don't have a chance and we can't win for a short time, but we can't stay there because we can't win from that place. And there is so much evidence that when people come together, when they fight together, that we can have progress. Mm-hmm. And I think we've got to do that now, especially since the stakes are so high. The stakes are very high now. We could lose our democracy. What we're seeing is an across-the-board attack on all our rights. We're seeing an attack on all our humanity. And we are seeing a march toward authoritarianism. And we cannot allow that. And so our hope has to not allow that. Our willingness to change that can't allow that. So I think those are all things that we have to strive for to keep some balance. But people do get to a place where it's very hard. Yeah. And we have to help each other stay out of those bad places, those dark places. We have to do that. And we have to be reminded to go to those places where our values dictate that there can be another world.
How have you kept at it for so long?
My fundamental belief is that this country can be better, and there are people in this country who want the same thing, and that we just have to keep struggling. And it may be, I have this sense that it may not be in my lifetime, but it's my job to continue to fight every single day for a better life for myself as it comes and for the generations that come behind me.
Thank you. Let's turn to the folks who are here. We have quite a great collection of students and townsfolk and who knows who else. Please, I think we have a mic to share. Yeah, and remember, you're asking questions.
Yes. Well, it's an honor to meet you, ma'am. Okay, as you know, in South Carolina we use ma'am and sirs, right?
All right.
And being from Georgetown, South Carolina, and just following up on what you just stated about the times, authoritarianism, tyranny, those type things. After listening to Dr. King's last sermon, which we did on March of 1968, he said we were sleeping through a revolution. And I would say over the last 50 years, because the unity wasn't there, the brotherhood and sisterhood wasn't there, that now what's going on, due to the fact that we as a people and a nation slept through the revolution of what's going on now, this is the outcome of it. And my question to you is, what suggestions would you have for us now, the students here, my being a child of the 60s and going to college in the 70s, we were more together, we were more unified, we mobilized, we did our research, you see? And I want that to come back. And I had the privilege to interview Reverend Dr. Bernard Lafayette. And one of the things he told me, he said, son, a protest is temporary. A demonstration is dramatic, but a movement lasts forever.
That's right.
So what would you say to us now who have slept for the past 50 years? What steps should we take to move forward to combat what's going on?
I think we have to do some of the things that you talked about. We have to analyze, we have to study, we have to come together. I think right now we have to look at the situation we're in. We have to analyze it. And then we have to be willing to take risk. We have to be willing to make the changes that are necessary. When people were in struggle in the 60s and the 70s, it was a different time, and the opposition was different. We didn't have the same struggle as we have now. The struggle we are engaged in right now is a struggle for our very survival, the very survival of this nation. And it was bigger. In the US, we had a struggle for women's rights and a struggle for civil rights, and there was always another group that was okay. But now we've got a struggle for the whole thing. We've got a struggle that crosses every line, where people are oppressed, where there's an attack on democracy, on rights. And so we have to, at this point, understand that struggle and then come together to, as a whole, fight those struggles. I think in some ways, it doesn't appear that way now, but I think in some ways, it's an easier struggle to pull people together in. I don't think we see that quite yet, but I think we will, because of the way the attacks are coming down and the way people are we're going to have to speak to them. We're going to stand up to them.
Do you think there will be clearly identified leaders in this struggle? That are there going to be some people to get behind, or is it going to be a scattershot?
I think like in most movements, they're clear leaders, but I think with the approach and the idea we have to have is that we are leaders. That I think the day is gone for one charismatic leader, and the day calls for many leaders, people bringing to the table those things which they can bring, and not being afraid to learn from others. So we need some visionary leaders. We need people who will stand up. We need people who will listen. The main thing about leadership is that it's listening to folks who are impacted. Mm-hmm. You know, we're listening to each other. We're taking the advice and the understanding in each other to move forward to building a solid movement in the country. So I think we're going to not need or have one charismatic leader. I think we're going to have many leaders. I think that there will be leadership, people that have been trained that rise to the top, and not rise to the top, but who rise,
whose voices are clear,
whose voices are clear,
Yeah.
and their vision is sharper.
Yeah.
But there will be room for many, many leaders, and it's a necessity.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear okay? See okay? Okay. Thank you, Attorney Pelles, for being here. I'm going to try to take, I guess, a little risk in the question that I'm asking, but also with the caveat that I'm asking as a community member not affiliated with Yale. But I can't help but feel the complicated irony, for lack of better phrasing, the fact that, you know, where we're gathering is also you know, within an institution that the administration has agreed to comply with the DEI executive order regulations that the Trump administration has enacted in order for higher education institutions to receive federal grants and research grants. So just in the spirit of what you're talking about of being, you know, us being the leaders that we need for ourselves, and then also possibly within the context of, you know, being within institutions or those of higher power that, and I think of this as an example of something that's running counter to what we're talking about today. I would just love to know your insights or thoughts on that.
You know, we often find ourselves in institutions that that in some ways contradict our basic values. And we have to, each one of us, decide what we do inside those institutions. And we have to decide not only what we do, but what we are willing to risk to be in those institutions, and how we show up inside them. And then for some of us, it might mean making some big decisions that are life-changing. And for those of us in these institutions, we need to figure out how we can change them. How do you bring power to bear? How do you talk about issues? How do you share your visions with the folks who are leading this? How do you mobilize inside an institution? And that requires courage to stay in an institution and to mobilize and to have voice inside that institution. The important thing is for us to find our place there. It's either stay or leave or work hard while you're there to change it. And I think that's a choice every person has to make. In these times, it is more and more difficult because the price is high. The price is high wherever you sit in those institutions. And so part of it is finding other people, not in an individual way, making a decision, I'm going to do X. I'm going to just march up to that leader and say, that's it, whatever you would want to say. But the idea is to gather others who think like you, who want to make change like you, and who are willing to do action to make that change, whatever that action is. Because I think we don't realize this or think about this enough. From wherever we are, we can resist. From wherever we are, we can resist. And so some of us can march right up there, and some of us can let her ride. But the thing is that we do resist, that we have to resist, that we have to find a way to do that if we're going to stay in the institution. And it's hard now. It is very hard now. And, we have to be able to speak from a place, especially coming out of YDS, that is value-filled, that comes out of our understanding of what's right and what's wrong. And I think we have to talk to these institutions in that way. We have to say, based on these values that I have that are both faith-based and just what's morally right and wrong, and also what the country, what democracy requires, I think we have to take both those to people who are leading these institutions and talk to them, and then try to move it forward. But I think that that's a way to get to them. But we have to do something. We have to act. This is a time where acting is not a luxury. I'm not acting. Not acting is not a luxury. We have to take that seriously because if we don't, every day we lose more and more.
You've spent the last few years teaching people who are largely going into churches. What do you see as the role there for those folks?
I think the folks who are going into churches with certain values have to go in those churches with a determination to carry them with them, no matter what the church is or what we think it is. Some of us will go into, especially graduates here, will go into some of the biggest churches in the country. They have some of the most power in the country, and then some of us won't. But it's what is we take into those spaces, and I think it's fine to go into those spaces. I don't think we should just say, those spaces are off limits, I'll go someplace else. Right. We need to go to those spaces, and in those spaces, do the kind of talking and modeling that's necessary, do the kind of building the structures within the congregations so that they're able to take on issues, so they're able to be a part of a social justice movement. It's so important, and the church is important to movement building, and it has been for the whole the existence in this country where there's been repression and oppression and there's been fight back and progress. We've seen the impact and influence of the church. So I think we have an obligation, especially those of us who are planning to be clergy, I think we have an obligation to take our best understanding of what that means, what it means to be clergy now in this time, and have the understanding that we do. I mean, it's imperative. So, and it is possible. It is totally possible that we see that in congregations all over the country. It's possible for congregations to change. It's possible for congregations to mature and be fully engaged in social justice work. Out of the Center for Public Theology and Public Practice, we do an internship where interns are able to see this in practice, where people are able to go into congregations and see how social justice and religion come together, that they are not separate, and that they don't, and that they can fulfill their mission to be truth tellers and to give comfort and support to social justice movements. It can happen in all, every denomination, in every, it's possible in every church. I think for those going into ministry, I think it's in some cases a hard job, and in some cases it's not. But I think we have to try, if that's what we're driven to do. And in the absence of that, you got to wonder what it is you're really called to do. In the absence of that, because that's what our teachings tell us. Social justice is our mission. I mean, they're not to be separated.
Thank you.
So I'm in the class, so I feel very grateful that I will get to ask you more questions throughout tomorrow. But I'm noticing this, I guess, theme of need for coalition building and a need for each one of us to be guided by our values and our beliefs in something better and something bigger than what is here and now. And I'm wondering, like, in movements that you've been in the past, how has the process of like goal setting gone in coalitions that are diverse? And how do you help people who maybe ultimately want to see a better day for everyone understand that that is actually what they each want for each other, and kind of help them help that come into clarity for people who maybe don't see that? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a need to have an agreement on the vision, what it is that we collectively are trying to achieve, and some principles that all of us agree to. I think that is so basic. And then some discussion about how do we want to work together, and then have an agreed upon analysis of what the situation is. What are we fighting? What are we fighting for? Who and what do we oppose? And I think that sets the ground rules, the groundwork for building a coalition. And there has to be some agreement that people will come into a coalition in a principled way, that we will be honest, that we will honor the work and the role of all the organizations or all the people that are in the coalition. And then we will move together, and there will be a constant contact. And I think those are the things that bring people together, and understanding that the struggle for Medicaid expansion, the struggle for voting rights, the struggle for women's rights are connected, and that the same enemy is the same. The enemy is the same for each of us. And people need to have a common agreement. And I think once they do that, then the tactics come after that. Like, how do they work together? What are the expectations? But I think there has to be that common understanding about why they're in this coalition and what they hope to achieve, and that they hold each other accountable, that they do what they say, that they tell the truth, but they hold each other accountable. If you have agreed on the front end to be in coalition together, to do joint work, to do it in a certain way, people need to step up and do that. And when they don't, their coalition partners need to hold them accountable. And we really have to struggle hard for these coalitions. Otherwise, we work in silo, and it's rare that people can win in silo long term. There might be some pitting people in various silos against each other, but for long-term wins, I think you have to be in coalition and you have to be willing to work together.
That's such hard work, and it can be slow work.
It can be slow work.
And in a time of crisis like this one, it's hard to face that.
Yeah.
To say, yep, we've got to build those relationships, we've got to be mindful of one another's needs, not just the ones we're identifying.
It can take time, and the situation we're in requires that we speed that process up.
Yeah, it does, right?
It also requires that we have to have more trust in the beginning, and that we're clear-eyed on what it is we want. The other side of that is people are maybe more likely to be in coalition, because it's pretty clear that almost no movement, no organization can win.
Can do it.
And so it may bring people closer together quicker. But the bottom line is, in either instance, is that people have an understanding about what they want to do together, and that people are held accountable.
That's helpful. Are there maybe 2 more questions?
There's a gentleman right here
Okay.
who's been.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
So I have a question about another institution, the Democratic Party. And just like what you see is, which in my view is constantly disappointed. So what do you see as the role of the Democratic Party in the resistance and its relationship to social movements?
We've got to teach them a lot.
Huh.
In a time like this, people and movements and institutions sometimes just don't know what to do. And in some ways, I don't think the Dems know what to do right now. And in some cases, you have to follow the leadership of people you've never followed the leadership of before in the party. In this case, you've got people that are stepping out and stepping up, who need to become the new voices and the new thinking in the party. AOC is one. Bernie Sanders has stepped up. We have to watch their, kind of what they're teaching us in the Democratic Party. And then we, as Democrats, have to demand some things of them. We have to teach them what they should be doing now. And I know we don't want to do that, but we can do that, and we should do that. I was in the airport when I was coming here, and the senator from Connecticut was in the airport, and people were walking up, talking to him about what he was doing, and mostly people liked what he was doing. Yes. And so I think that when just walking up to them saying, you got to stop this, or in town hall meetings saying, you got to stop this, you got to have a backbone. I'm so lucky, Jamie Raskin's one of my congressmen, but they are not all Jamie Raskins. And so we have to, and even Jamie Raskins need to be pushed sometimes. But I think we have to really push them to do more. And at least they are open to doing more. Unlike the Republicans who, even when they know what's right and wrong, they sometimes will do what's wrong. I think that we have a chance to reach people who are willing if we help them learn what they need to do right now. Because right now, what we're seeing is a reliance on the old ways we won. We're seeing a reliance on the old way politicians responded to other politicians, and we just need a bolder, stronger party. We all are called to be bold in this moment. And what can happen is, as there are more attacks, people shrink back. This is no time for that. People have got to be the boldest they've ever been, and we've got to help the Democrats be bolder than they've ever been, because we need that right now.
Hi. I wanted to ask, have there been movements or relationships that you've had to disentangle yourself from? And what lessons have you learned from those shifts? And what became clear to you as you entered into more uncertainty?
That is a great question. There have been movements that I had to disentangle myself from, because ultimately they did not meet my values, or I could not agree with the tactics and strategy that they had, that they were presenting. And I think we all have to be, when we're in movements, have to be able to make those decisions, to strive for those understandings. It is important to be able to know when it's time, when a movement is not serving you, or when it's not serving the people, because that's the critical question: is this group serving the people? And if it's not, then I believe we have to get out of those movements and find a movement that is, or create a movement that is. And we need to question. We need to not be afraid to question leaders or people involved in movements if we worry about the direction, about the language, and about their connection to people. We have to be willing to ask the questions. And then we have to be most willing to leave. I believe sometimes that's the hardest thing to do. Is you've got a community, you've got some people who you've been working with, but you have to be willing to leave that if it doesn't suit your purpose. And then the question is, do you have the obligation to talk to folks in the movement about why you're leaving it? Why you think it doesn't serve building a bigger, sustainable movement? Because that's important to them, because they may be having some similar questions, and so that gives them a way to have some discussion about it. But it's important to know when you're in a movement that's not right for you, or for growing a bigger movement. You have to know when that time is, and then you have to be able to act. Because otherwise you're building something that you know doesn't work, or possibly could not work, and that you know doesn't serve the greater good, the long-term good. That's a great question.
Roz, I wonder if you might give us a charge, if you might give us your sense of where we should move, and what's ahead, and what do we need to get there?
At this moment, I think it's important for us to understand and fully what this moment is. That this moment is a moment that we have not seen in this way before. We have to come to that. There are a lot of people saying, well, we've come through some hard times before. We've never seen this before. We've never seen a march toward authoritarianism. We've never seen these kinds of attacks. So we have to understand that. And then we have to be engaged in struggling against these attacks wherever we are, whatever, however we can, and in the boldest way that we can. This time requires boldness. It requires us taking some risk, and there are risks different from in other movements. This time requires us stepping across all lines of historic division. And so we have to do that. And that's the charge for us, to do those things, to try to fight despair, and to use hope as a guide for the way we're working every day. So it's real, those things are important. And I think we have to be in the fight. However we can, we cannot wait on somebody else to do something. History shows us we can't wait on somebody else to do something. We have got to do whatever we can to turn these attacks around.
You join me in thanking Ross Pelles.